So funding, there might be some, in terms of where the source of cash comes from, there might be a third-party funder. We have historically provided funding for exits. Your mainstream banks are a popular choice, but that usually means taking in funding from a third party secured over the assets of the business. And that will not get you all the way there. You will never borrow the 100% of the value on that basis, because one of the differences you will have for an employee buyout from, say, a management buyout is in a management buyout you might get a small group of employees, say, remortgaging their houses or some such, putting significant chunks of change into the deal. You're probably going to struggle to get that in a lot of these employee buyouts. You get it sometimes, and I've certainly seen 6-figure sums raised, but I've not seen 7-figure sums raised by groups of employees. So, based on their own personal finances. So you'll often have a third-party funder, but it won't take you all the way there. The employees will put some cash in, but if they're putting it into a share incentive plan, that's often in the form of small amounts of cash going in over a number of years rather than a big lump sum. But you do sometimes give them incentives to put money in early, give them some extra shares if they buy early, or indeed, because at the outset there's a bunch of debt in the business, the share price is often artificially low, and it can be an incentive to let employees buy in. But that needs to be tempered by the knowledge that you don't want to give away shares too cheap to employees as well, because the employees will want to sell those shares at some point, and if they buy them too cheap and they sell them for a too great a profit early doors, will you be able to fund that sale later on? So you always need to be looking at structurally in terms of what will be the impact on this a few years down the road. The seller will often take some deferred consideration, or indeed sometimes sell their shares in chunks. But obviously if the sellers continue to be owed money, and I would say the vast majority of cases, the seller's owed at least some cash still at the time of the transaction. And indeed, vendor finance is often the majority of the cash, depending on their attitude to debt. A lot of businesses have become very conservative about debt in the last few years. And actually, the fact that the debt is owed to somebody that they know and trust, in terms of the owner and the company, that they're all known quantities, is something they find attractive. But as soon as you've got something like that in place, you want to have significant protections in place for that seller that often goes beyond, because if the bank's involved, they're probably sitting behind the bank. And if there isn't a bank involved, the debt's probably larger than any normal commercial lender would make. So the protections that go for that seller are usually go beyond what you would say if you're a bank, the kind of protections as a bank you would look for. So it goes beyond simply taking security over the assets. It actually goes into, well, they should probably have some quite potentially intrusive controls to protect their position until that debt's been repaid. And sometimes the company's got cash. Certainly one of the things that's been happening with the fact that these delays have been going on because people are waiting for these tax reliefs is, well, the money I might have started paying out on these repayment plan for the debt, I'll just start building up a wee war chest. And there's often a sum of cash that comes from the company's assets that gets paid out at completion. And HMRC is usually comfortable with that. But like I say, we usually go through a tax clearance process just to make sure that HMRC is comfortable that any such payments like that are not deemed to be a sort of dividend by default. So the funding can have an impact on timing. Obviously, if you're dealing with a third party, you'll have their procedures to go through. If there's a ranking arrangement to put in place, that can have a timing aspect as well. So there's very few aspects of this that, like I say, involve third parties. But if you're going to have you need to make sure you've got the bank on site, so that you're not dropping any nasty last minute surprises on them, that they're kept informed, they know what's going on, so that the transaction can proceed along the timetable that everyone wants, which is fine as long as everyone's kept up to date. But I've sometimes seen unfortunate delays happen because people haven't kept the bank informed as they should have done, so that there's then a decision-making process that needs to be gone through on that side. Even just because you've got an overdraft facility and you want to grant some security to the ex-owners, and you've got to put a ranking arrangement in place. So it's and also for all sorts of other reasons, that for historical reasons, sometimes employee benefit trusts have had a bad press. And there's a number of questions that your bank might want to ask you about what you're doing with an employee benefit trust in your business. We use them for 100% legitimate purposes. There's no clever tax planning used with employee benefit trusts when we're putting these in. They're just vehicles to help achieve the ownership structure that these businesses want to achieve. But, like I say, if you can't come up with a fundable price, there's no deal.